The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of paid sponsors. Episode 167 of the Drive-By Podcast is sponsored by Les Délices Lafrenière, voted Montreal's top bakery and pastry shop on those best of lists for a reason. Simplement délicieux. 5 great locations, including the Hub and Original on Rue Lafrenière in St. Leonard, Rosemere Pointe Claire, Montreal West, and the newly expanded store in my neighborhood in Brossard on Taschereau. It's Les Délices Lafrenière. Happening for a limited time until February 25th. Get the barbecue pork ribs and creamy potato soup duo for $30. This is their original signature barbecue back ribs served with fries and coleslaw and that incredible, I tried it, awesome, potato soup duo for $30. I'm telling you, when you finish eating it, you're gonna feel full. That's how much food they give you at Baton Rouge. Go to batonrouge.ca to find out the closest restaurant to you, including the newly renovated and expanded restaurant in downtown Montreal on St. Catherine at Complexe Desjardins. It's Baton Rouge Grill House and Bar.
This is the Drive-By with Freeway Frank.
Marion, you finally made it. Thank you for coming on the Drive-By Podcast.
Absolutely. Flew all the way in from Florida.
Which is another Montrealer who left Quebec to go to sunny Florida to pursue their dreams. I don't blame you one bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty nice there.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous place. Why not? Now, I'm going to mention off the top, you have your own merits. We don't need to mention Viva Fry here, but I am going to mention it because I do have questions about both of you as a couple, because it's interesting. You're two highly intelligent people. I've watched your stuff, neuroscience. You're a neuroscientist. What he does, he's a former litigator and now phenom on YouTube. And I would imagine it's very interesting when you both gather at the table with your family, when you have two extremely smart people sitting down, what you discuss, what you talk about. But besides all that, you went to Florida to pursue both of your careers, or was it mostly because he had to go there for his deal, and then you're like, oh, okay, Florida, neuroscience.
I guess I'll tag along.
I'll tag along. I could do neuroscience anywhere. I'm smart.
Yeah.
So how did that happen for you?
My goodness, it's a very complicated. It wasn't just an overnight thing. It was a decision that we thought about for quite a while. Well, first of all, we have known, Dave and I have been. We met in 1999, so we've been together for a long time, and we've seen each other grow both throughout our school. We both went to different universities, and then pursue our different careers. And we got married and had a family, so we've been through a lot. And I don't know, where do we start? Our move to Florida was it happened in 2022. And it was during the pandemic that we were here, and Dave's career changed from being a lawyer to all of a sudden he was creating content to bring people's awareness to issues that were really bothering him. And
bothering you too. For
sure. And it was, but they were controversial, and I am a non-controversial person. For the two of us, we're yin and yang, like in every way.
Yes,
we're very different, and that's what really brought us together, and that's what's really kept us together.
Is it fair to say he had nothing to lose, and you had a lot more to lose, because controversy is something you want to stay away from, obviously, as a neuroscientist?
Yeah, absolutely. As a scientist, we typically stick to ourselves, do our research, and politics is just not something we get into. And so during the pandemic, it got really weird, because there were policies that were being made based on science, and I have no experience in the policies that were being made, or in COVID or in viruses or any of that type of science. So for me, looking at it, I was still an observer. This wasn't research that I was working on. I had my own research. We also have 3 kids, and so everything was overwhelming. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who are going through the pandemic and everyone was in survival mode and trying to, just survive. And people were telling them what to do, and they trusted that they were being told information that was accurate. And for Dave and I, we were sitting back and saying, like, we have the big decisions to make for ourselves and then also for our children. So I think we really stepped back and tried to assess everything with our emotions at bay, that we weren't taking really emotional decisions to move. However, I think a lot of people saw it as a very emotional move, like that we're uprooting our family.
Let's be honest, some people looked at both of you, as they did a lot of people who did the same thing, and moved away, like something's wrong with these people. Like they've lost their minds, right?
They wrote, a lot of people wrote him off, and a lot of people where I worked, most people didn't know who Dave was. Like, he has a following, but not... Most people on the street, when we go out, people don't track him down. Once in a while, like, oh, hey, I know you. In the airport, someone will come up to him and like, hey, I love your content. And it's nice. It's really nice. If anyone sees him, he loves to be recognized and to talk to people, to fans. It's like you have an instant connection. And that's why I feel like this is the first time we're meeting.
Yeah, it's first time.
But I know you've had him on the podcast, and it's like someone that I know that we're thinking similarly, but also, we can have this conversation, and you're not judging, or you've put some thought into the issues, and that's really all I really wanted to do. Is to have conversations, not short little sound bites of. Or short little texts or phone calls or messages or emails, and that's kind of what was happening during the pandemic. Everyone was in their own little bubble, especially with friends of mine who had they're raising their families and having to do what they need to do to survive.
Yeah, it was
really
a survival mode.
It was in a survival thing, and you had to do what you felt was best for your family. So he was trying to go to Florida early on. I think before he even ran for the PPC.
Yeah, People's Party of Canada.
Yeah, so he decided before that, okay, well, let's move. And I was like, we're not moving to Florida. And he's like, no, we're going. Like, this is getting crazy. Yeah. And if you know who he is, he's like, really, this is crazy. We're getting out of here.
He's intense, but his brain intense. Works at 100 miles an hour because he's extremely smart man. And by the way, I love watching his stuff. And same thing with you is, you're two different people, do two different things, but having watched a lot of your content, even though I never read, we're going to talk about that, the brain coloring book here, you brought a copy.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about that too. But, you learn a lot about a person, especially when you're stuck at home.
Yeah.
And like we all were, like you said, we were all in survival mode, and we were all trying to find our sources, our true sources for what was happening.
Yeah.
And then, you look at the person, okay, well, here's Marion Van Horn, and she's a neuroscientist. This makes her smart. And here's what she's saying. Talk about that. Here's what she's saying about it, and happens to be, Viva's partner, and here's where they both stand on this. But then at the same time, I would see that and think right away that, you have colleagues that you've worked in your profession with, and people who don't think like you or like us. Right. And that must have made it very difficult. And also, I had my last podcast guest on here, Abdul, who was a comedian who moved to Florida, who said people judged him when he made the decision to move to Florida, and they didn't even know why. And he's Florida. Yeah. So then
you love Trump now, right?
Exactly. So that's an automatic. You face this too.
Yeah. People assume that you're making these decisions, and they're like, oh, well, how can you love Trump? I'm like, who said I love Trump? Okay, so my husband might love Trump, but at some point.
You've never made an opinion about it, right? I don't think so.
I don't put my opinions on social media anywhere as much as Dave. Like I said, I like to kind of have conversations. So people that I was working in a lab. So I'm a neuroscientist. which some people won't know what that is because there's a lot of different. It's studying the brain. So I work at the Montreal Neurological Institute not at the moment, but up until we moved.
That's where you were.
That's where I was.
Right across from the old Royal Victoria Hospital.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was born at the Royal Vic.
Amazing.
And then I went and did my undergrad at McGill in physiology, and then I did my PhD in physiology, in neurophysiology at McGill, and then did a postdoc. So I was probably 29 when I started my postdoc at the Neuro, and my postdoc went on until I left. And so someone who's not familiar with how that kind of academia works is typically when you do a PhD somewhere, you do a research project and it can take like between 5 and 7 years. So mine took a good 7 years, and during that time I was studying eye movements, how the brain controls your eye movements. And we make different types of eye movements. Like often you don't even think about how your eyes move around, but you're constantly surveying and making what's known as saccadic eye movements. So your eyes move together very quickly at like very high velocities. And I was studying how you make vergence eye movements. So when you move from something far to something near, and looking at really like the motor control. So you have in your brainstem nuclei that have motor neurons, and they project to the eye muscles and they move them around. So it was a lot of recording of the neural activity. So your brain really talks in electricity. It makes like you have your brain.
The neurons.
The neurons, yeah. So your brain is made up of neurons.
Yeah.
And
which are messengers.
They're messengers. Yeah, they're messengers. They have a cell body, and then they have lots of processes that come off of them, and some of them receive information. Those are the dendrites, and there's one that is an axon that sends information to other neurons in the brain. So I was studying these motor neurons and premotor neurons, and these were neurons that every time you moved your eye in a certain direction, they would start firing. So we say firing because it's like it's called an action potential, and they make all these very quick little changes in neural activity, which is driving the eye muscles. So you can think of it if you were driving a car and you put your foot on the gas, it's like the more you put on the gas and then the faster it'll go. So you can make correlations between the movement and the neural activity, and we make like little models to try and explain the correlation.
So that was your focus of study?
That was for my PhD, yeah. So 7 years, that took 7 years.
7 years.
You publish a bunch of papers.
On that.
You go to conferences, and you really, by the end, you feel pretty much like, I can't study this anymore. That's how I felt anyway. I can't
felt
study,
that about the history.
Yeah, I can't study eye movements anymore.
I can't study this anymore.
I
don't know how you did it all those years.
It's very interesting,
intense.
But it's intense, and then you have to write a thesis, and you have to defend it. And then after that, I decided that I wanted to stay in research. It was something, I do really like the research part. You're able to ask questions. You have a lot of freedom, usually, to be curious and be like, oh, I don't know that much about that. You can read up on it, and you try and stick to your research project, but you can still, you have some freedom depending on who your supervisor is and what kind of relationship. But anyways, I finished that, and at that point during my thesis, I wrote my thesis over the year that I had our first kid. So I took some time off, but also Dave took some time off. At this point, he was working at one of the big law firms. So he was a lawyer, but didn't love his profession, if you may have heard. So lawyer.
What are they all
about? He
was
working, downtown, and we had our first child, and he was just like, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. Like, he was just sure. He's like, I can do it for now. He didn't really feel like he was respected within your, like, a low, he wasn't an artist, I think he was a lawyer. So, but he was still long hours. They're expecting you to do whatever they asked you to do. And he decided to take parental leave. As a PhD student, I didn't really get any official time off. I had time that I just extended my thesis writing period, so it took longer. And I had some support from my supervisor, so I could do it at home. So we were both home in the beginning with our first child, and that's when he decided, I'm going to take some time off and just be a dad. And that was 2009, so that's like before YouTube or anything. But even way back then, in 2009, he was thinking.
His mind was there.
Yeah, so I think he took 3 months off. And one of the memories I have is he went to work when he went back. It's like, or he went back one day like, hey, how's mom? And like referring to him being the mom.
Yeah, exactly.
How's
Mom.
Matt leave? Yeah. So he's just, in 2009, I think it's a little more normal now maybe. Then it was still
a little taboo.
Yeah,
back then
you expect to work, you're not going to make your way here. You're not going to move up if you're going to take mat leave. You're not serious.
Right.
And it's like, why? There's no reason. I'm coming back the same person. And I'm helping to raise my child. So he took the time off during our first, then he took time off for the second, and then time off for the third. So he was just very supportive in that way. And
so he supported you in the beginning because you were at the height of what you were focusing on for your profession.
Yeah, for sure.
And then later you would kind of do the same for him by realizing that now he had this opportunity to go to Florida with Rumble and everything that was happening with YouTube. I'm going to support him right back. See, isn't this an incredible story?
Well,
no, it's true, because you have two professionals, high-level professionals, very hard.
It's very difficult.
With 3 kids now.
3 kids, yeah. And I see it all the time with people, exactly that. It's like, I didn't marry him because I wanted him to be a stay-at-home dad. Like, that also was just not in the cards. Like, I'm not attracted to him as the stay-at-home dad.
No.
I'm attracted to him because he's, outgoing and motivated and career driven, or just driven for different things. So he was helping, but we were both supporting each other during that time, during all of them, for sure.
I'm curious as to how you got into neuroscience at a young age. Okay, so you said when you started and you got into it for your PhD and everything like that, but okay, so for me, I knew at a young age I wanted to be on the radio.
Yeah? Did you?
Yes. I remember hearing this voice coming out of the radio and thinking, so you know what I did? Not a very bright kid. Yeah. I took a screwdriver, opened the radio to find the voice. I was very young. Extremely young, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So for you, was it much the same thing where you were just, how do you just, when they say, I want to be a neuroscientist, it's not something you hear every day. Yeah. And you don't hear a 5, 6, 10-year-old kid in school saying,
I wasn't a 5 or 6-year-old that wants to be a neuroscientist.
Right. So how did that, so did you want to be maybe
a scientist? I really liked science. Okay. And
you excelled in science in school, probably?
I come from a family of scientists.
Oh, nice.
I'm fourth generation. My great-grandfather moved here to start a dairy company. They did dairy, ice cream and yogurt in the Eastern Townships. Okay. And he was a food scientist.
Oh, nice.
And then my grandfather was a chemist, and he worked at Bishop's. He was a professor. And then my father was a food scientist, and he worked for a big company in Montreal making yeast, L'Alma.
So you grew up in the Eastern Townships?
Yeah, I grew up in the Eastern Townships. I went to a public high school in Cowansville. Anyone listening will know. Yeah.
I think I went through it once.
Yeah. So one of those community, so all the different all the different towns in the area would all go to this one.
Yeah, one
So
school.
you had Knowlton, and I grew up in Bedford and Sutton, Mansonville. Everyone went to this one high school. And during high school, I liked the science fair projects. So in grade 9, I did a science fair project with my best friend, and her father was a physician, and we were really into sports at this time. So we were both on the basketball team, the soccer team, and he encouraged us and supervised us to do our first science fair project, where we looked at the effect of Coke and Diet Coke on running in young girls.
Wow.
So I have a very clear memory of this science experiment or study, where we recruited some of our best friends and we had them running on a treadmill it was all supervised by our doctor.
Yeah.
But and he was very into running, and so he wanted to encourage us to look at the science, but also in a way that's really engaging our interest, because we were interested in, like, how do you run faster, and what's the difference between different people, and we were looking at VO2 max and measuring heart rate and all that kind of stuff, which I thought was really cool, and the health aspect of it was what I was really interested in. We ended up testing, I think, 4 young girls. I remember that because that was the title of our science fair project, and we did really well. It was a short. We had 4 people in the end, and what we did was we had some running after they fasted all night, and they had Coke or Diet Coke, and then we wanted to see if they could run further after they've had Coke, which had sugar, versus Diet Coke that had no sugar. And it wasn't, in retrospect, very controlled study, because you can taste the difference between Coke and Diet Coke.
Yeah.
And in the end, I think we did see that they could run further on when they had sugar in their. That was the hypothesis, that if you have sugar, that you'll be able to go further after fasting. So that was the idea, and really in science, often it's that's the idea. So you need to build a hypothesis and test it, and then if you have enough resources, you can test it properly. We obviously, as 16-year-old girls, didn't have the resources to recruit.
You had a couple of cans.
Yeah, we had
Coke and a couple of people
who knew, who knows what they were doing the night before, and they came in. And anyways, but that really is what sparked my curiosity in I guess science and science experiments. And we went on to the local science fair and provincials, and so it was exciting. You
were serious about it.
Yeah, we made our poster boards, and we really liked it. And then I did it the next year and up until grade 11. And so I just liked the health science part, and went to Dawson in health sciences, and like I said, then went on to McGill.
So in all, how many years of education for
just
neuroscience?
A lot.
So you said it with a little.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just like I feel like
it never really ends.
It doesn't end.
It doesn't end.
It's like I'm still learning.
Yeah.
There's still so much. Yeah, I'm always becoming more curious about different aspects. But I would say in general, I'm interested in how the body works, and then I became more interested in the mind and the brain.
Because there's many aspects to neuroscience, right? There's the psychological, there's the physical brain, there's
right. So I think what got me into the mental or the physical, away from the physiology, because I was studying physiology, and that was like, how does the pancreas work, and the heart, and the circulatory system. But then I was doing a minor in psychology, and I think it was a class in abnormal psychology, where you start to see that people are different. Like, what makes one person this way and one person that way, and we're all so different. And I think it was the abnormal psychologies, but the psychology is looking more about like behaviors, whereas neuroscience is looking more at how the brain works on like a molecular level, a cellular level. So that's where I ended up, and that's where my most recent research has been in. It's looking at so after I studied all these motor neurons, I said, well, like, there's got to be, what else are we, like, I'm writing up my thesis. There's got to be more to this. Like, it's not just about what do I want to do next. And I wanted to study, so the brain's made up of neurons, and those are the main, or they're meant like 100 billion neurons, and they connect to each other with synapses through their dendrites and their axons. But surrounding them are this other type of cell called, like, they're glial cells. And I had glia.
Yeah.
I had no idea what they were. I was like, oh, I just called myself a neuroscientist. And also just to reflect on that, being a neuroscientist, throughout my PhD, it was in the Department of Physiology. So I said, and people would ask me, I was like, oh, I'm in physiology. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I was with my colleague, and she goes, I'm studying neuroscience. I'm like, oh, wow, cool. Tell me more about that. I'm like, we're doing the same project. And she says she's studying neuroscience, and she gets this amazing reaction. I say I'm studying neurophysiology. I'm like, oh, what's that, like a physiotherapist? Or, like, I don't know. There was just this different reaction to neurophysiology, which we were really doing the same stuff. It's just the way you you sell it sometimes. And that was like a light bulb. Like, so then I started saying, well, I'm a neuroscientist. And sometimes
It is a cool title, I have to be honest.
Then more recently, we've been doing these things on Instagram. We're like, I'm a neuroscientist.
Yes.
Like, listen to me. Like, I'm trying to, it's supposed to be a joke.
Funny.
Like, if it's not clear. I try not to take myself too seriously, but.
But it was actually funny.
Yeah, I think.
Because everybody in the community will, in your field will understand and get a good laugh at it. And everybody else is like, what are these people talking
like, why are you?
Yeah, it's so that the glia is more the nervous system, right? And how it comes together with the brain as well.
The glia are just another type of cell. So it's another type of cell. They're both in the brain, and glia are. So it's Greek for glue. And when they first started looking at the brain, they could see that these neurons are electrically active, and you could record that. So they developed techniques to do that. And the glia, they're like, they're just support cells.
Yeah.
And so they just got pushed over as support cells. But
secondary.
You know what? Support cells are actually very important.
Yeah.
And so they do support neurons but they release a lot of substances. They make contact with blood vessels. So they're taking things from the blood and bringing into the brain. They're very important and were not that well studied. So I wanted to do that.
the brain is like, look, okay, and I know, like, my understanding of this is very remedial. Okay, so now I'm going to sound like just some guy who's asking the silly questions, but it is, from what I've learned or the things that I've watched, the brain is kind of like looking up at the sky at night, like you said. And you see the stars and it's electrical, right? And it's just lighting up. You're seeing things above you. Yeah. The brain is always working. It's always lit up. The neurons are electrified, right? And it is quite an amazing thing that we have. But like you were mentioning before, I'm curious as to, we could condition our minds and our brains, but our physical brain, what we're given at birth is what we're given, no? Or does that, like you said, we're all very different people, but do we, again, another possibly dumb question, but your brain that was given to you at birth and my brain, we have no choice. That's what we have, right?
Right.
So
but
you can naturally have higher IQ because of what you got?
Or, a little bit. So there's a lot of genetics involved.
Yeah.
But so what I ended up studying for my postdoc, the research question was how do early life experiences shape the brain? And I was looking in an animal model, so I can talk more about that.
Okay.
But just the general question was like, we're all born with a brain. Do our experiences later on in life make any difference, or are we just destined to be the person that we're going to be?
That's my question, exactly.
And that's a definite no.
Okay.
We're all born with maybe certain natural tendencies or genetic predispositions, things like that. But we do what your early life experiences and what your
traumas, change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. They're all influencing the brain.
Okay.
So you're born with all the 100 billion neurons that you need when you're born. Your brain is set up in the way it's supposed to be set up, in that you have your frontal cortex and you're in the front, and you have your occipital lobe, which is for vision, in the back. It's organized correctly. What changes is all the connections between all the different brain areas. And so I was saying before that the neurons have all these different processes, and it's those processes that change a lot during early development, and we call this neuroplasticity. So that's, a lot of people hear the term,
I've heard that.
Neuroplasticity, a bit of a buzzword, but during development, your brain is really plastic. It's very easily changed by your experiences, and then as you get older, it gets harder. So they say it's very plastic from 0 to 25. And really, in reality, if you really think about it, there's different brain areas develop at different times in your life. And so your sensory systems, like the parts that develop very early, your visual system, your auditory system, your touch system, taste and smell, those develop very quickly. And then things like your prefrontal cortex, which is very important for planning and decision making, that continues to develop into adulthood. And it develops at different rates for different people.
Okay.
and so my takeaway from a lot of this, and something I think is important for people to know is that these areas can develop at different rates. And so everything's a bell curve. And when we look at averages, we see like, oh, you should be, your prefrontal cortex is mostly developed by this age. But for some people, it may take longer. It might happen a little. It might start a little bit later. So they might not be good at decision making until, and I'm thinking a little bit of my, daughter versus son, and I find that there's differences in their development, and so I think it's when you think about it that way, you can have a little more compassion, especially if you're a parent thinking about their development. That sometimes you can start to think that things should happen by a certain point, but it's really. Every development is different, and it happens over time, and that it's shaped by our early life experiences.
You hear today, you hear a lot of people talk about, what you could do for brain health. And before it was just, especially in school, I remember we never heard about brain health. It was mostly physical health, what to eat, how many meals a day, brain health. But now you hear about it all the time. And, there's obviously good things you could do for it, and then there's people pushing pills or whatever because this is going to make your brain more sharp or whatever. But there are things you could do daily to make your brain better, to put it in better
It's my favorite thing to
Let's talk about it.
Like, give us, and it's in our coloring book. So,
it's in the coloring book.
Yeah, so in the coloring book, so I should just say, this is a project that I did over the last year. With my colleague Maria Zamfir. She was a PhD student at McGill and at the Neuro, and she's the one who did all the illustrations. And she was doing these illustrations throughout her PhD, and she found it was a good way to, when she would learn something complicated, she could break it down and she would make these neuron characters and make little stories with them. So when I moved to Florida, and Dave has this visa that says I am not allowed to work.
Oh, I heard about that. He mentioned that. I go, really?
And so when we filed our taxes last year, and the accountant says, "So you're a homemaker?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm a homemaker." And I think 20 years ago that would have really annoyed me. Like, I've worked hard for my degree, but now. Being a homemaker is a very humbling experience.
Absolutely.
And it's very important. So I said yes, and I'm very proud of it. So we got together one day on Zoom. I knew her, but not very well. And I said, "What are you doing? Like, I want to do something creative in the next year. I have an idea for a book, but I don't have enough time to really write a whole book right now." And we decided to make a coloring book that really starts from the beginning. What is the brain? And what is a neuron? What is a synapse? Some things that we've talked about a little bit here. And it goes into a little bit more detail than you would get maybe just by Googling it. We've put a lot of effort in the sequence so that it tells a bit of a story, starting from the brain and then going deeper to neurons and glia, and it has where you can color along, and then you can also, there's activities that kind of reinforce some of the learning, and at the end we have a whole section on how can you keep the brain healthy. And if I can explain it to, the book is great for like 6 to 14, maybe older, but it's also good for adults.
I was looking at this saying, wait a minute, this is for kids?
Yeah, but that's it. Some people look at it, they're like, oh, it's a coloring book, it's not for me. But the idea is to make it playful and accessible so that I think it's really great, like if you're going on the plane and you just want something quickly to look through.
And I believe about 10 years ago, coloring for adults became this thing. Remember that? And people were doing it for mental health, kind of like just focus. And
so I looked into some of the studies because, you hear that. And they have done studies where they show that it decreases stress. So they've done some studies in college students. They'll have them color the mandala before doing an exam. And they did find that some of their stress tests would decrease with a little bit of coloring, and you can see it if you sit down and color. It's not easy.
Oh no, I suck at any kind of art like that. Coloring, painting.
But it's also, it's not even like, it's just you've got to kind of shut your brain off in a certain way and just relax. But you're still doing some motor controls. Your brain's still active, but the cognitive part is not firing as much.
Myth, you only use 10% of your brain. Fact, brain imaging studies have shown we all use our brain even when we are sleeping. So that's BS.
Right.
It's not 10% of anything.
I actually don't even know what they mean by you use 10% of your brain. When the person who says, I don't know I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
You use
maybe
all
we're not
of your
we're not using our brain to our fullest potential. Maybe
I don't know. But even so, I think that's a great part. I think the most important thing you can do for your brain is sleep. Period.
And that's what a lot of people don't get nowadays for whatever reason.
Yeah,
right? They're not getting a full night of...
a quality good night's sleep is very important, especially for children, adolescents. Yeah, but I think when you get to in your 20s or whatever, sleep is very important for mental health. And it's not just because your body rests, and that's what we wanted to say there. When you're sleeping, your brain is still very active, and
it's always working.
Yeah, some really incredible research came out not long ago, like 10 years ago, showing that your brain changes a lot during sleep, and that you have this lymphatic system that basically opens up so that you have more clearance of some of the cerebral fluid within your brain. So you can think of part of your sleep is getting like a little wash. You're getting rid of toxins, metabolites that may build up during the day. And then it's really important for memories. So things that you've learned during the day actually become solidified when
during
you sleep. Yeah, so that I think people don't really appreciate.
No, I don't think. So everything you learned today. What did you learn today?
What did you learn today? When you go to bed, it's not just that you're thinking about it, but you actually have during the day. So at these, it's called synaptic strengthening. When you learn, your synapses are changing, and they're becoming, like if you're learning something, we call it strengthening, and that's what's happening. Partially in the evening, because they've been marked during the day. So something, we don't exactly know how, and these are some of the research studies that are ongoing to really figure out the mechanisms. But the takeaway is, you need sleep to enhance the memories and the learning that happened during the day.
I like this part here. Playing outside and getting sunlight during the day also helps you sleep better at night. Exercise and fresh air, which is something that somehow disappeared over 2 years at the beginning of this decade. We're not going to bring up what I just did. No, but you know what I mean?
Okay, so this actually, when I really got into this and thinking like, okay, like what do we need for minimum functioning? Because as we found ourselves during COVID, all of a sudden everything's shut down. I'm a researcher in a lab. The labs are closed. I can't go to work. That was my work. I could do some things at home on my computer, but for my projects to continue, I need to be in the lab collecting data. So I found myself at home. I'm writing grants because that's how research is funded with grants. So that's a whole nother rant about how much effort we have to put in to try and get money to fund grants. And you're not paid well as a postdoc, and you have to apply for grants, and then you get chunks of money for a year, and then you have to reapply. And so a lot of your time is writing grants of like what you're going to do, and you don't have a lot of support. You have zero support, actually.
Which is puzzling to me.
It all is very, very, very puzzling because as I just was doing as the best I could, but I had kids. At some point, I was going back. So you never get in Quebec. We have an amazing program with maternity leave, which you don't have in the U.S. With that, I am extremely grateful raising my kids in Quebec. I'll say that. I would not have done well in the U.S. with kids at a young age. So my kids are all now 7 and older. They're in school, but the daycare systems and that program that they've established is incredible. Now that I've left, it's like...
So there you go. There's something good about Quebec. People hate on Quebec all the time. You said something nice.
The daycares, that system, and having a Canadian system of having maternity leave and parental leave is just incredible for women, really, to be able to work and also take time off to have kids. But the issue is after a year, it's like you have to go back and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, like time to go back, send your kid to daycare. So that transition I could complain about. But as a postdoc, you don't get that because I'm not really an employee. I'm a researcher funded through grants and not through an employee of the university. So what was I saying? So I took some time off, but then also had to go back. And at that point, I still had young kids, like a baby. So I was pumping, still nursing, but there's no facilities at McGill because they're not up to date in that. So it was very difficult in that respect to be a postdoc trying to have kids.
But
at the same time,
let's say for younger people wanting to get into neuroscience, and when I got into broadcasting, my goal was never, I'm going to make a ton of money. My goal was be as successful as you can be. That will bring you the wealth, riches, whatever that you will need in life to live, right? Your livelihood. But I never was motivated by money. But if you're sitting here saying it's a lot of work, right? It's intense.
It's not for the money.
Ever changing. You would, but why? But it's not for the money. But I mean,
thrill
this is
of
where
discovery.
Yes, it's the thrill of discovery. But man, I mean, you've committed so much of your life to neuroscience. You know, we throw away money and give away money, you know, as governments for nothing, and we don't know why half the time we're sending money overseas to countries, whatever the case is. And then we have something right here. Follow the science. Well, how about we start by following the science?
How about we fund the science?
Fund the science. Give the money to the people who know what they're talking about, and let's go.
It's very discouraging.
It's very discouraging to hear you say this. I'm sitting here going, wow, man, this is, for all the efforts that Marion has put forth in her field of expertise, and this is the reward? It's
extremely discouraging. You put a lot into it, and I see brilliant people applying for grants from the government, then they don't get it, and so they're writing another one. So it's very stressful that you don't even know if your research lab. I just heard a very good friend of mine, he's been in research for his whole life, and the lab is shutting down. They were doing basic research. What happens is people don't really appreciate the importance of basic research. If I told you right from the beginning what I was doing in the lab, it's not interesting. You really have to break it down and then explain it in a way why it's interesting. But what I was doing on a day-to-day was very nitty-gritty. And so you talk to someone like, why would we fund that? That doesn't make any sense. That's not going to solve schizophrenia. Well, it's not going to solve schizophrenia, but we still don't know a lot of the basics of the brain. We don't know some of the receptors and how they change. And during development, we have, at a synapse, you release these neurotransmitters and neuromodulators that I'm sure people have heard of, serotonin and dopamine and glutamate and dopamine, GABA,
our favorite one.
Acetylcholine, all of these neurotransmitters, they all have different receptors. And even the receptors are different. So it's so complicated
and always changing.
Oh yeah, changing throughout development, changing with experiences, changing with so much. So we have to design experiments where we really go back and look at one receptor and one subtype of the receptor at a certain type of development, and it's like everything has to be really controlled, and we have to get rid of all kinds of variables. So it's a very important work, but sometimes you can, if you're just to tell someone, it's like, oh, why do we need to do that? We have, we have cancer that we should be supporting or spending money on. So there's a friend of mine, she left academia and she's working for a company, and she put together this little spread, which I thought was quite striking, where she took funded research grants and she put it into some software, and it spits out the size of the letter is how much, size of the word is how much funding it got. So cancer was huge and Alzheimer's was huge, but these are already the diseases. Like that's too late when you're funding to solve Alzheimer's. To treat it. But why is there Alzheimer's? And so if we know more about how the brain works on a really basic level, that's where we make
Exactly.
advances. And I'm more interested in that part, in the health aspect of
Yeah.
how can we better understand the brain so that we can just understand how we function and how to keep it healthy.
We'll get back to episode 167 of the Drive-By podcast with Marion Van Horn in just a sec. But first, Les Délices Lafresnaye, 5 locations to hook you up with some incredible cakes and pastries. You're going over to somebody's place. It'll always look great when you show up with a Délices Lafresnaye box. They never know what they're going to get inside. Lobster tails, cannoli, or even the zeppole, which are happening now. They're available for the St. Joseph patron saint every March, but they get cracking early in February at Les Délices Lafresnaye. 5 Montreal locations: St. Leonard, Rosemere, also in Pointe-Claire, Montreal West, and my home location in Brossard in the newly expanded store. Check them out. It's lesdeliceslafresnaye.com. Looking for a great night out with your colleagues or family, friends, whatever it is, a drink at their bar, Baton Rouge Grill House and Bar is the place to be. Check out one of their 29 restaurants, including their newly renovated and expanded restaurant in downtown Montreal at Complexe Desjardins. Baton Rouge is the ultimate place to head and relax and have a great meal. You won't be disappointed. Steaks, whatever you're looking for, they've got it. The barbecue pork ribs I keep telling you about, the creamy potato soup available for only $30 until February 25th, tempura shrimp if you like that as an appy, or grilled octopus, steak tartare, creamy potato soup you could order individual as well, or the Rickard's French onion soup. It's Baton Rouge Grill House and Bar. Find out the closest restaurant to you by checking out their website at batonrouge.ca, or if you want to see what's happening, want to see a picture of what it looks like, you could also go to their Instagram page. All their great meals on the menu available on there, and you could check it out at Baton Rouge Grill House on IG. Today we hear about the thing you hear about the most when it comes to the brain is the mental health aspect of our brains. You hear it all the time. I'm curious as to, this is something when you walked in to the studio a while ago, was the first thing I wanted to ask you. I said, I'll keep it for the podcast. Back in the day when I was growing up, we never heard that term mental health. Okay. But I would imagine it's always been with us since the dawn of time. We've always have, and I talk about this in my podcast, not knowing anything about the brain or neuroscience, is that we all have a brain, therefore we have mental health because it's the health of our brain.
Right.
But back in the day, we never learned about any of this stuff, or at least it wasn't a focus of schools, education. It wasn't a focus, at least when I went to school. Employers never brought it up. Now, it's all you hear about: mental health, mental health, mental health. It even became one of the biggest platforms for one of the biggest corporations here in Canada, which I think they misuse that platform, and they have, in my opinion, they've misused it and actually given people more mental health issues based on what they've done in the last little while, including a couple of days ago. But mental health, we all have it, and we all go through tough times, and for some people more severe. I've been lucky enough I could sit here and say, okay, my mental health problems have been minimal. But why are my mental health problems maybe at this moment minimal, but for somebody else, it's maxed out to the point where they don't want to live anymore? Yeah.
I mean, it's a very interesting topic, mental health, but it's so complicated, and to simplify it into something like mental health is like, it's just health. Like, how are you feeling? For sure, the pendulum has swung from not talking about it at all to now you ask a 5-year-old and they know what anxiety is. like they have an anxiety. Well, I have an anxiety disorder. So I was at the Science Center. That's actually why I came. Was on Saturday. There was the Science Center had an event. It was
here in Montreal.
Yeah, at this in the Old Port. There's a really nice science center. And they were doing a women and girls in science exhibit, where they had a lot of different companies and the hospital, the neuro was there, and they were trying to promote science to, I guess, to girls and women. I don't love that idea of having something special just for
Gender?
For gender.
Okay.
I think like, science is science. There's lots
everybody.
there was for
Yeah.
everybody. It was for,
This was specifically for
well,
women and girls.
it was called that, but there was nothing that made it specific to girls. But
Okay.
it's like they're trying to encourage women
Yes.
to be in science.
Okay.
But that's another discussion. Anyways, they had all these different booths. It was really
You don't buy into, by the way, you don't buy into any of that stuff. I know.
No, I think it's making it worse.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
In the long run.
Sorry about
so
that.
yeah.
Go ahead.
We had a booth, the Neuro, and we had all different activities. We had a whole brain, so you could go and touch a brain, like from a human cadaver, which was like pretty impressive. And then they had a neuropsychologist who had little tests that she would give to someone who came to the Neuro if they had some kind of, like a patient who, there's all kinds of different patients, but let's say someone with epilepsy or someone who had a stroke, they would run them through a bunch of different tests. So she had these tests available that people could come in and try. One was like a motor test to see if, and motor coordination, if you could touch the, there was like numbers on a circle, and you had to touch them at a certain, as fast as you could, and there was different tests that you could do just to test your motor coordination. And then I was there with the coloring book, and I was giving out
Nice.
these little cards that they could color. And then there were a few other little games that they could do. But what I found was like, yeah, the kids came up. I'm like, do you know what a neuron is? Yeah. Do you want me to tell you in English or French? Like, I was just like, okay, I wasn't ready for this. Like, I was kind of expecting. And so they are starting to even teach it, just basic neuroscience, basic brain health to younger and younger.
Which is good.
Age. I think it is important.
That aspect, yes.
Is important.
But then
yes.
anxiety?
But yeah.
Should a kid know what anxiety is at 5? Maybe I'm a little off.
Yeah, I think it's important that they are taught their emotions, really. I think one of the biggest things as a population, we don't know about our emotions. We have so many emotions. A lot of us just try to suppress or like not recognize it. And I think, especially when you have kids who are developing what we call emotional regulation, is that they need to. It's a total normal thing. And as parents, it's very frustrating because they haven't developed their emotional regulation. And as parents, hopefully we have. Often we haven't. If you want to test your emotional regulation, have a toddler have a fit in a grocery store as they're trying to get out as quickly as possible. Like having kids brings out a lot of deep feelings and emotions because you think they should be a certain way. You're trying to, especially now, we're trying to get on with our lives, and we're working, and and your kid's having a tantrum as you're trying to drop them off at daycare. And so I found, as a neuroscientist, I had no training in child development. And so I started actually, just before the pandemic, I reached out to a colleague who had started a podcast it was kind of like a parenting podcast. She was a neuroscientist, also a mother of 3. And she had left academia and started this podcast called Curious Neuron. And so she was going in and interviewing different psychologists who actually were specializing in child development. And I found that really helpful as a parent, was to better understand my child's brain and how it works and what is normal and what is not normal. And what you find out is like a lot of that emotional regulation and is things that are developing throughout the childhood, and we have to guide them. We have to be like their North Star and help them. And a lot of the time, it takes a lot of energy, and I think we don't appreciate how much it takes out of us because we just try and do that, and then we go to our job. And I found I was like showing up at my job, I'm like, I'm exhausted. I just dropped off, one kid here and one kid at daycare, and I get to work. I'm like, I can't even function. And people say like mommy brain, or that's another thing, but it is, you are mentally drained. And so this is kind of getting off topic of the mental health, but it was my mental health, I guess, was deteriorating.
You're speaking from experience.
But I think these so I'm going to spin it as, I think it's important to talk about it, but I don't think the way that these blanket terms like mental health, we have a mental health crisis.
You don't think that?
Well, I think I don't like saying it like that. I think that
how would
I think there's a crisis in and maybe that's the easiest way to say it, is there's a mental health crisis. But I think there's a crisis in that, I don't know, people are suffering in different ways, and we need more support from each other. And in communities, I think we've lost a lot of our
sense of community.
Sense
with
of
people
community. Oh, for sure. Like, I think that's
being
one
compassionate.
and getting a lot of information and thinking we should be doing everything and comparing ourselves to everyone, and yet then you're left comparing yourself and not realizing that you're an individual who's on their own path, and things that work for them won't work for you. And you just
That's well said. I mean, yeah.
I don't know.
And then social media, that's a totally different ball game, how that has upped the ante, I guess, with mental health. I think people sometimes don't even realize what they're watching on a daily basis.
Right. How much you're consuming.
Yes.
And you're not giving yourself enough rest time.
Yeah, that hurts the brain, I would imagine, because you're all these messages and then all these ideas, and then that's where the anxieties come from. It's like, look how well these people are living. They're in Florida. Look at this perfect family with 3 kids, and they're both successful. And not true.
No,
we all are struggling. No, and I'm not speaking for you, but we're all struggling.
And it's that. Then it comes down to mindset, and so that's also a big. Encompasses a lot, but
mindset is everything.
Yeah, like 2 people. I was just talking to my friend. Do you know my friend Melissa Esbag? Do you know?
Yes, she's on my Instagram.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've ever met her personally, but her and I have connected on a few.
Yeah, because she was a very good friend, and she was friends with Dave's in high school.
She seems sweet.
Yes, very nice, and was my. Her daughter and my daughter are best friends.
Oh, okay, cool.
So during the pandemic, we were texting a lot.
Really?
Yeah.
I was texting everybody. It was wild. That's all we were doing during those times.
Yeah. So what was I saying?
Melissa?
Yeah.
During the see. By the way, this happens to me very often.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk. This is one of the things once we get back to your train of thought. I lose my train of thought so easily. Do you notice that?
Yeah, you're talking about something and then you're...
No, but I mean, to the point where I'm Googling it now, like going, is this a precursor to something that's about to happen to me in a few years? I don't know. Or is it just because we're more overwhelmed than ever with all these messages, which is what we were discussing?
Okay, so now I remember. Yeah. Thank you. So we were talking yesterday.
I'm pretty surprised I got us back on track.
It took me a second.
The non-neuroscientist.
What was I talking to Melissa about? But we were talking about mindset and how 2 people could have the same life, and one person looks at it like, man, my life sucks because I don't have that. And then the other person says, my life is amazing because I have already what I have. And for sure, that's something I had to figure out for myself, going through everything, not just the pandemic, but having kids is very stressful. And so you're comparing yourself to everybody. Like, how come that mother can show up at daycare and get to work, and she's a lawyer, and that scientist, how come they've got a job? And you really have to be like, we have different lives. And especially for us, I've had to use humor because I'm like, look at our life. This is crazy. Like, my husband is throwing pumpkins from the roof of our house. That's why I can't get to work on time. He just asked me to order a 1,000-pound pumpkin. I can't compare myself to that person.
Right.
And I don't want to trade places with them.
Right.
But for sure, I found myself in those positions.
Mindset is everything in sports, right? You don't have yesterday was the Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl,
and I had this feeling that Kansas City was going to make a last-second run, and that's all mindset. And Mahomes, when you hear him, quarterback for KC, talking about that at the end, it's like he was so focused and determined. He knew. Down to the last second.
Yeah.
He was so focused on the team, they never a doubt in their mind. That's important. That's everything, right? Believing and having that mindset, even the late Kobe Bryant, Mamba mentality, everything he stood for was that very thing that's important.
Yeah.
To me, at least, has everything to do with your brain, which is why you're here to talk about the brain.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to reflect a lot and really go back to the basics, like, okay, what's making me, and thinking about what how my brain developed and where I came from. Dave and I came from very different backgrounds, and so we've been together for so long. Our brains, I think, have merged into one. Like we joke, but we finish each other's sentences. I know what he's going to say.
My wife and I too. Yeah, exactly. It's weird. Once you do become one.
Yeah, and we met each other when I was 17 and he was 19, and that I think as a neuroscientist, like, wow, my brain was still really developing at that point. I know him on a level, I think, that's not like how people are dating now. They're meeting later and they're already established in their self. And at 17, I was still very much changing. And it's funny because I've lived in this area since I was 17. I lived on de Maisonneuve.
Oh, okay. So you were around the corner, and I worked pretty much in this area throughout my career.
Yeah, this is my...
Yeah, this is your hub?
This is my definite... I went to Dawson and McGill.
So it brings back memories, this area.
Yeah, and then even we were living on Green Avenue. This is my...
I worked on Green Avenue. My first radio gig was on Green Avenue.
Yeah.
So
I love the area. It's just...
So you do... See, that's the thing about...
I miss stuff.
Exactly. You could take the person out of Montreal, but Montreal always remains in you. I remember because I left Quebec for 18 years. I was out of province. I never thought,
really?
I was never coming back. I left prior to the second referendum and said, no chance, I'm coming back here. And I only came back for the gig, the radio gig, and I've been here back since 2011. But the thing is, when you're out of Quebec or out of Montreal, all you talk about is Montreal, right? Anyone who will listen, you'll be in Florida, you'll be wherever you are. And in Montreal, they have the best bagels, smoking. Oh yeah,
exactly.
I went to see this show. I just came back from this in the old port where we had this convention, whatever the case is, and it's like, the old port, it's just so beautiful. European city, and it just goes on, and it's true. You don't realize what you've got, right? Until it's no longer there.
For sure. I love everything about Montreal. And miss a lot of it. I miss the coffee shops. I miss walking everywhere. We used to walk to McGill. I would walk everywhere, walk to get your groceries. That doesn't happen in Florida.
No,
it's
you're in a car everywhere you go.
I moved to suburbia too. So I'm not living in Miami. I'm living in communities where you have to drive places.
Right.
So that's very different. But we were becoming a little claustrophobic downtown. You can't get a place that's suitable for 3 kids.
No.
And that's what happened during COVID is I started to analyze, like, what do we need to really function? I need my kids to be outside. So that you're supposed to be outside for 1 to 3 hours every day.
There you go. 1 to 3 hours,
now, okay? 1 to 3 hours.
Hang on a second. Let's break this down. I don't have kids personally. We tried, unsuccessful. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have some kids.
Yeah.
But I don't see kids outdoors. We lived outdoors growing up. We were outside at 1 to 3 hours. We were out like 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah, that's great.
Do you force your kids to go?
So during the pandemic, that's when I was really like, what do we need? Because Dave and I were both working. Like, we both were ambitious and wanted to keep doing our career. But we also my kids are still number one. So I started thinking, what is the most important thing for them? And it's like, they need to be outside. And we have to force ourselves to get outside. So it's not like, I don't really feel like it. It's raining or whatever. And so, at some point I was like, it's time to go outside. And you feel so much better.
Absolutely.
Any parent who has been in their house with their kid, at some point you just, you get stir crazy, you get outside, and I was like, okay, you feel better. And there are physiological reasons as to why, because when you're inside, let's go back to eye movements. You're making these eye movements. You can only make them so far. Once you get outside, all of a sudden you have this like panoramic view, and they've shown that your eyes are part of your brain, and it connects to parts of your brain that control this feeling of being calm. So all of a sudden your stress will decrease. You just feel it. You go outside, and now if you're more aware of it, you're like, oh yeah, I can look around. Yeah. I feel better. Like, so sure, there's still a kid crying, but it's like, okay, but I can look around. And so I was doing things like that, forcing them to go outside. And, 80% of the time, there were days where you have to be compassionate to yourself. But majority of the time, you've got to be 1 to 3 hours outside, rain or shine.
Vitamin D is important.
Winter
sunshine, or some.
But then, so we moved to Florida, and that's not even an issue anymore, because you open the door. And it's like we're outside. So all of a sudden, things that was actually quite stressful for me here, because we didn't have a backyard. My kids were little. I couldn't just send them out. We live in downtown Montreal. Mm-hmm. So it was me. I had to go out with them. And we were lucky we lived on a park. So I could go out with my whatever I was reading or a podcast, and they could play. That was fine. But I feel for people who are living in high-rise apartments, or they don't have those resources to be outside, and they're working, and they have to be at their computer. They can't go out so at least during the pandemic, they couldn't. So that really adds up with the stress. So,
and then when you weren't able to travel, and right, where a lot of people were going on vacations prior to the last couple of years, or were able to go anywhere, and then when you weren't able to go anywhere, and you were told to stay indoors, I mean, that affects everything.
But then again, the travel part, we did a lot of road trips and things like that. We've come from times where, as a postdoc, I was making the majority of the salary, and we were not always working with a lot of money. And that's when you learn that, it's the experiences that you're building.
That's all it is.
And again, mindset, like going camping for a weekend and getting your kids away from the screens. It doesn't have to be that you're flying to Mexico. I would recommend not doing that, because that adds to so much stress. Try to do something. Like traveling is so stressful. That's not what they're going to remember.
No,
they're going to remember. Like we went on some crazy road trips, and we'd put on music. Dave let them listen to the most inappropriate music. My daughter has turned out fine. I'm very proud that she knows all the words to Lonely Island and Eminem, but she's fine. But that was part of the experience, is that they actually liked going on the road trip. We didn't bring the devices. It was less of an issue, I feel, when she was younger. That wasn't so prominent that everyone had a phone, and so she has a phone up now. But then we were able to just go and listen to music and camp, and it was cheap.
That's true. You don't even have to spend all that money and go.
No, and I think that goes back to mindset. It's like, we're going to do an experience together. I'm not going to compare myself to the Joneses, who are taking their whole family and they look like they're having a great time at Disney. They are not having a great time at Disney. That is the worst place on earth.
Worst place on earth. I agree.
They are.
What's so exciting about that place?
The parent.
It's expensive,
and they'll remember that they went to Disney, but parents, oh my goodness, it is so challenging to travel with kids, because again, your sleep patterns. Kids really do well with predictable schedules, and so they're going to be off. And the unexpectedness of traveling, especially for some kids, it's like very overwhelming. They don't know what's coming. I know, some kids are just more sensitive, and I can see that with my youngest. Is he doesn't really do well when we do those like very spontaneous, let's go to Disney or whatever. Like, where are we going? this is like I don't know what's happening, and so then the stress comes out in what looks like misbehavior, but it's really he's stressed for what's going on. I don't know.
I think people have forgotten that the most, like you just mentioned, the best holidays, the best memories are closer to you than you think. That's why so many people thrived. The people who lived, outside of the cities during the pandemic thrived, because they had a bit more space. They had a bit more, places to go where they were now being watched, or whatever the case. And that's why more and more people now have looked at getting out, because there is something special about living in the eastern townships, or visiting at least, and being out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's very peaceful. I just got back from my in-laws have a hobby farm in Fort Erie, which is close to Buffalo in the United States, but on the Canadian side. Yeah. And you're in the middle, you 3-4 acres, whatever. You have chickens, you have goats. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so much. There's activity happening, but not really a lot of activity. No, not too many people. Right. There's space, like you said. There's the sky. You get out, and everything feels better when you're breathing out there and you're in the middle of nowhere. Whereas here, sometimes you feel claustrophobic. Yeah. But maybe that's what a lot of people were feeling, and maybe one of the advantages to living somewhere else,
Yeah.
away from the city.
Yeah. Well, for us, Montreal was starting to feel small. Montreal is great, but it's, in Westmount and downtown, and you run for politics and everyone knows where you live. And
that's the thing. It's 4.2 million people, but very small town mentality, meaning everybody knows you.
Yeah.
How does everybody know you when there's so many people?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah. And so when Dave was at the end growing more controversial, and people weren't really listening before having very strong opinions. Even people who were very close to me, they'd already put him into a box, and that's when you can't even have the conversations. You're just like, okay, we're going to go somewhere where we can just reset, and no one knows us. Like we just.
I understand that. I totally understand why you guys made the move. And that's what a lot of people did during that time. Not to rehash it or bring it up, but it really has affected. It's affected me. It's affected you. It's affected all of us. I mean, there's still a part of me that doesn't wake up any day of the week and not think about it. It comes up even for a second. I think, oh yeah, remember what that person said, or oh yeah, remember what they said, or oh, there's somebody walking with a mask outside in the middle of nowhere. It's like instantly triggered. Like I'm instantly, I have an opinion. I'm like, okay, Frank, put those thoughts away to rest.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Who cares?
For sure.
We've been through it, been there, done that. But it really does affect you.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness. I think it's good though to talk about it and to rehash it, and people, it's like also, moms, they talk about their childbirth a lot, and they go through and they like visualize it. And I think it's therapeutic. So I think talking about it, even wherever you were during the pandemic, people's opinions changed, and it's okay.
It's better to speak and to talk about it than to not be allowed to share your opinion, which is something that we couldn't do.
Yeah. And
now I think more and more people have figured out, I always have my phone ringer turned off, and now for some reason it was on. Now see, I lost my train of thought. That's all it takes. A second. Where was I going? Were you following me?
We were...
The Brain, mysterious.
So the Brain coloring book is available on Amazon.com.
One of the things that, as I got distracted, and now who knows, throwing me in a different direction, but one of the things I wanted to ask you that I try to do, and I don't know how important this is for the brain, but to me, I read a book many years ago, decades ago, that helped me out very much, called The Power of Now.
Yeah.
You know that book?
I know it. I haven't read it. But
I think a Canadian. Oh, no. He lives in Vancouver, but is originally from Europe, I think. And what I find, at least for my brain, because my brain is very bizarre. It's either not working, meaning tranquil, or it's going 100 miles an hour. And sometimes I go to bed at night, put my head on the pillow, and whoa, the thoughts are just, and I find I need to do a lot of in the now activities. Like for me, those activities are golfing in the now. I don't think about anything else for 4.5 hours. Poker, because of the mathematical aspect to it, I don't think about anything else while I'm playing it.
Yeah.
I'm really captivated in the moment. How important to you is being in the now?
Oh, for sure. These types of activities where you can disconnect, and almost, for everyone it's a little bit different, but it's almost like a meditation where you can disconnect, get rid of those thoughts. You're only you're focused for that period of time on something that's not, about the lists that you've made in your head that you have to get done. Is you're just going to focus on finishing these goals. I feel the same way. I feel so much better. Even like a podcast like this, where I
was just going to say that we were completely focused till the phone rang.
Yeah.
And then I was like, ruined the now, because I was literally
real life.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And that's even like coloring is an example for some people where they can get into, or coloring or crafting for a lot of people, the knitting, crochet, whatever, sewing, painting, drawing, all of these activities. It's going to be different for everyone, but figure out what it is for you that gets you out of your own head.
Your own head, because we're in our head a lot.
And I would say for that, the book I would recommend is Chatter by Ethan Kross.
Okay.
Fabulous. For me, it was a really great book.
Chatter by Ethan Kross. Has this book been out a while, or?
Yeah, a couple, at least 3 or 4 years, maybe 3 years. we interviewed him on the Curious Neuron podcast.
Oh, nice.
And he's a psychology professor, University of Michigan, I think, and talks about, I heard him give a talk, and he was talking about like listening to you talk to yourself, like all the chatter that's going on. And I hadn't really appreciated it. And I was walking down the street, and I'm like all of a sudden tuning into what I'm saying to myself, and it's incredible. And then you can be like, oh, okay, I don't want to say that anymore. It's almost like you're, you feel like you're torn.
You're a spectator in your own head.
But it's happening. Your chatter is constant.
True.
Chatter. So if you can just identify it and be like, okay, I'm going to bubble that up, and I don't need that chatter right now, and listen to what level is it? Is it negative? Is it positive? Are you talking nicely to yourself? Is your chatter how you would talk to a friend of yours, or is it very negative? Are you constantly in this chatter of negativity? So I read that. It was very mind opening for me. So I would, and very accessible read too.
So Sam Harris was my favorite neuroscientist before I met you, and now Marion has become my favorite neuroscientist. I'll tell you for a couple of reasons. One, because
I'm not political.
And Sam Harris has a little TDS and CDS as well. You know, he's anyway. So you're my favorite. You're at the top of the list. So you've surpassed Sam. I don't know if that's a compliment, but I really appreciate you being on the Drive-By podcast. I learned a lot about the brain today, which is the coloring book, which is available on Amazon by Marion Van Horn, PhD, very smart, and Maria Zamfir, PhD as well. The Brain Coloring and Learning Book, Volume 1. Will there be a Volume 2? I would imagine.
Absolutely. It's coming.
Why would you label it Volume 1?
Volume 1. Volume 2 is coming out in the spring. It's going to be about touch and pain. So how your brain processes touch, what is pain, and then some very superficial ways to think about how to address pain and pain management. So we're working with actually the McGill Pain Center and the Quebec Pain Center, and they kind of collaborated with us. So it's we're excited about it.
May I recommend also that you go back to if you maybe just put it on pause for now, doing a podcast. You're very easy to listen. I have my headphones on, so I hear your voice as well. Very nice to listen to, and I think you would definitely captivate an audience. If you're going to be doing it again, or I think you should do a podcast. On everybody and their dog does a podcast,
well, that's the thing.
But I think you could find like a niche, and with the many things we discussed today, I think you're great, and I think maybe even having co-host, maybe like, I don't know, if Maria or someone like that. I think it would be very interesting to have somebody have a different spin on neuroscience. That's what right now I am doing a lot of data collection. Okay. I am looking on Instagram, podcast, YouTube, and I'm just really like what's out there already. Instagram, Twitter, it's flooded. It's really like Instagram. I can't. It's just very short information, superficial. A lot of people saying the same things, and I think I'm kind of done. Yeah, I'm going to continue to post here and there, but it's very hard to grow. People don't share as easily. Like Twitter's easier to grow and reach more people because you can share. YouTube, I think, is still good, but you have to reach your people. You also have to focus less on numbers. We have a family YouTube channel. Did you know that? Oh, I think I did come across that at some point. Yeah, Viva Family. Oh my God, Dave is going to kill me if I don't tell you his fishing story. Sorry, this was almost over. Yesterday, he sends me a video. Yeah. So he's in Florida. I'm here alone. And he's fishing with Ethan, and he catches... Your son? Yeah. So he catches 2 fish. Actually, I'm not even sure if Ethan was there. I don't know where he was. I think he was alone in the video. He catches 2 fishes, so then he starts the video. He's like, oh my goodness, I just caught 2 fish right in a row. This is amazing. I think I'm going to catch another fish. And he throws his line in, he reels it in. He catches another fishing rod. So he's pulling and he goes berserk. Like if you've seen him in his non-political videos, he just goes crazy. Oh my God, I've caught
got a fishing rod. And he brings it in. It's like this old fishing rod that's kind of disintegrating, but he thought that was, he texts me. He's like, this is amazing. No one's going to ever believe me. But I'm like, I was watching it. I don't even think I believe you. It looks pretty fake. But he posted that video on
Viva Family?
Viva Family.
Okay, so that's your family channel.
That's our family channel. We are not that regular, but once in a while, if we go on a vacation or something, we will post some aspect of it on Viva Family. So
thank you so much, Marion. I really appreciate it. I hope you come back again on a future episode because I really enjoyed learning more.
Volume 2.
About volume. Well, yes, exactly. The brain. Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Great.
Thanks for watching episode 167 of the Drive-By podcast. It is sponsored by Les Délices Lafresnaye. There's a reason they've been voted Montreal's top bakery and pastry shop year after year. They always make those best of lists because they're simply delicious. Simplement délicieux, with 5 locations, including my favorite location, closest to my house in Brossard on Boulevard Taschereau. It's Les Délices Lafresnaye for custom cakes or whatever moment you're celebrating in your life. They'll also do any theme cake you want for that person you love. Check them out at Les Délices Lafresnaye. Well, on this podcast, I was just talking about the brain and what fuels the brain better than anything else. That's food. And I'm thinking Baton Rouge. Check them out. Go to batonrouge.ca to find out the closest restaurant near you. I know the closest one to this podcast studio, and that's at Complexe Desjardins, newly renovated, newly expanded. You could go to that one or the other 28 that are available, one coming soon in LaSalle in the Montreal area. I'm thinking right now, seared ahi tuna. I'm also thinking their signature spinach dip or their starter salad, Caesar, their onion soup. They've got it all. Beautiful steak, medium rare. It's batonrouge.ca or check out their IG page at Baton Rouge Grill House.
This is the Drive-By with Freeway Frank.
Watch all episodes of The Drive-By on YouTube. Listen in on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, Podbean, and tune in.